Hi. I think that there isn't any doubt that the majority of the American people are convinced of the competence and the courage of our armed forces. The question is, in many of our minds, is the best way to employ that force to promote our objectives. If the Taliban, came back into power, do you think that they would be willing to pay the continuing price of having Al-Qaeda be part of their country? I mean, and they would pay a price in terms of special forces, bombing, all the rest. And how could we convince these people that provide a haven that it's not worth it?
Yeah. You asked my opinion on that?
Yes.
I believe they would. I believe that if the Taliban was in control in Afghanistan, we would see Afghanistan used as a base for Al-Qaeda again. I believe that in my heart of hearts. I mean, I fought Al-Qaeda for 2.5+ years in Iraq. I've read their doctrine. I've read what they're trying to do. They're trying to establish a caliphate. That might seem odd to us here, but they have a very long view. And so my short answer to your question is I do believe that would be the case, and that is why it's fairly fundamental that we have to build the indigenous security forces so that they, over the long haul, can deny that country as a safe haven for terrorists.
General, certainly an honor for you to be with us this afternoon. I represent Congressman Marshall Fudge, and we have a question in reference to the amount of individuals that are deployed at this time in the Afghanistan theater. We have close to 8,400 people from Ohio presently there. Why should we increase the number of troops there when the history of time has showed this is an unstable region, and what particular military strategy can be utilized to be strong in that theater?
Yeah. I mean, it is an unstable region. That's exactly right. And what we're trying to do there is bring some level of stability there. And you mentioned the region. But if you think about this, if you start all the way over the Mediterranean Sea in Lebanon, there's a country with democratic traditions. Syria is still a challenge. Iraq, a country rapidly growing in its democratic traditions. Iran is a challenge. Afghanistan, a country where if it had democratic traditions and moderate Islam, you start to see what I'm saying here. You're starting to build a belt of moderate Islamic states with democratic traditions across the Middle East. Pakistan also has democratic traditions. So I mean that in my view, that's the long view of this, and that's where this is ultimately going. Now, people ask me all the time, do I believe, this is the army that defeated Alexander and defeated the Russians, and why do I think that we can be successful? I believe we can be successful because we're not occupiers. We're there to help them build their security forces, build their countries, and over time move. And the reason that I believe that we need to put some additional troops in there for a short period here over the next several years is because we have to knock the Taliban back a bit while we train the Afghan security forces. And those two things, train and fight, are what has to happen over the next several years to set the conditions so that the Afghan government and security forces can ultimately take charge. And I don't want to prejudice any decisions, but that's kind of how I personally see it.
Good afternoon, General. My question is kind of related to the last question, but also pertaining to the current utilization of the troops that are in Afghanistan now. I was in Afghanistan from 06 to 07, and my observation, be it very small, was that there were a large number, or I guess you could say an excess, some could say an excess of troops at some of the larger bases, say Kandahar or Bagram, maybe by nature of their MOS or their training, but there was an obvious shortage of troops out at the forward operating bases and the PRTs. And I guess my question would be, have you identified that as an issue, or is it an issue? And if so, what can you do to fix that, either through training or recruiting or what?
Well, I mean, it's not a function of the troops not being available. At that time, it was a function of the troops not being available. I mean, we all wrestle with too many troops in the headquarters. I used to wander around my headquarters and see people that I never saw before. And you go to the dining facility, and boy, there's all kinds of people hanging around the chow line. And I'm kind of wondering, what the heck are all these people doing? Now, they're all, they would tell you they're gainfully employed, and it's hard government work. And I know from a platoon outpost, looking back at that big headquarters there, you're always wondering what those yahoos up there at headquarters are doing. But I will tell you, one of the things that I learned, though, is that the complexity that these senior headquarters are dealing with in trying to mesh the political, the economic, the military, and the information, it's hard government work. Now, I have the same reaction that you did walking around some of those bases, but I will tell you, it is really hard work. And your comment about not having enough troops out where the rubber meets the road, I think, is exactly the discussion that's taking place right now. Because there weren't enough. And back to the question that started this over here, that forced the troops to rely more on air. And as precise as we can be, you can never see inside a building. And while you might know there are bad guys in the building, you never know who else is in there. And that creates problem for us. So we're trying to rectify that balance there.
General Casey, how do you feel about increasing the size of the Army and reducing, as a result of that, the amount of redeployment by reinstituting the draft?
I want to make sure we're clear here that no matter what anyone might perceive I say, Casey does not say we need a draft. Candidly, the volunteer force is not only working, but it's working extremely well. And we are continuing to be able to attract the quality of men and women, again, that I mentioned earlier. And so I do not think we need to go back to a draft. Now, you talked about the size of the Army. I mean, that's a very interesting question. I mean, we have the same challenges that every business person here has. The costs of personnel are only continuing to rise. And so I mentioned that Secretary Gates has allowed us to increase temporarily the size of the Army by about another 20,000. And I'm looking very closely at that, because if we need those additional forces, we'll keep them. But there's only so much money to go around. And the more people I have, the less well I can train them, equip them, and house them. And that's the balance that I have to strike. And it's a pretty and modernize it. And that's the balance that I have to strike. And it's a pretty fundamental question. I think it's probably the same for most business folks here as well. But that's the challenge with the people.
Afternoon, General. I am a MS3 cadet from John Carroll University, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on some of the most important leadership aspects or characteristics that you would like to see within future officers and non-commissioned officers.
Oh, great question. Great question. As I go ahead and sit down. I get nervous when the questioner is standing at attention. I love it when reporters do it, which they don't do very often. Anyway, think about the environment I described to you, and think about how complex that is.